Ones who are sexist, women can be sexist as well.
The protagonist, Elizabeth Zott, a chemist who's had to battle endless sexism in the workplace and in life, she uses her cookery show as a rallying call to housewives. Cooking is chemistry, she says, and chemistry is life. Your ability to change everything, including yourself, starts here. Is that something you believe in yourself, in the profound transformative power of a kitchen?
I do. You know, the interesting thing, and one thing that Elizabeth Zott says is a lot of people make different things, but food actually transforms our brains and our bodies. Food determines how well we will do in life. If you're fed a decent diet, you'll do a lot better than someone who isn't. And so I take cooking very seriously, even though I am absolutely a failure cook. I don't even like to cook. But yes, I think food is incredibly important in the world.
There's also, of course, you can tell from the title, a lot of chemistry in the book. Are you a chemist?
I am not a chemist, so not a chemist, not a cook. I will say that learning 1950s chemistry proved to be a little more daunting than I thought. And I had to buy a book off of eBay, an old textbook, to teach me chemistry from that era, because if you try to Google it, you will pollute it with modern day chemistry. You know, the periodic table continues to change. We continue to find new elements all the time. So I had to go back in time in order to keep it accurate.
Your protagonist, Elizabeth Zott, she's a chemist, she does it in the lab. She also turns her own kitchen into a lab. When you were preparing to write this book, did you try out any of the chemistry?
I did. I did a lot of experiments in my second to my last flat here in London, and I had two that ended in fires. They were large fires, and the fire department had to come.
My goodness.
Yeah. You know, this is the thing about chemistry, is that you do have to be really, really careful, because things will explode on you. And so the fire department came, and they were so nice, hosed everything down, and then the guy saw my chemistry book out on the counter, and he said, "Now, you're not doing chemistry experiments in this flat, are you?" And I said, "Well, but I'm a renter." And he goes, "Oh, okay."
So that's okay then. Yeah. If it's not your flat, go ahead.
He was so funny. The second time they came, he was really nice, and he brought me a gift of a fire extinguisher to keep.
Very thoughtful.
Yes, you would have thought I would have gone out and gotten one. I did not, but he said, "Here's something for you forever."
So Elizabeth Zott is thwarted in her chemistry career, thanks to sexism, and becomes a TV cook. Where did you get the inspiration for the dishes she cooks up to the American nation?
The dishes all come from dishes I remember growing up. My mom used to make this really incredible macaroni spinach casserole, which doesn't sound very good, but it was the only way we would eat a lot of spinach. And
I must just say, so this is one of the first, if not the first, dishes that Elizabeth Zott cooks up on TV.
Yeah.
So this is the first dish you chose to tell us about.
Right. That dish was really important in our family. When my friends would see the macaroni spinach casserole, they'd take about 10 steps back, because it was almost solid green. And so it would look like some rocks covered with green algae. And it did not look that good. But then she'd put some cheese on top. And I've got to tell you, this thing was so good that once everybody tasted it, everybody would say, "Is your mom making the macaroni spinach casserole?" That's how popular it was.
It's kind of incredible for a dish involving spinach to be popular with children. I mean, that's a testament to your mother's skills.
There's probably a lot of butter in it. Yeah. Something about the way she combined the ingredients that now chemically I think I would understand better made it so good. She was just a very good cook, and she took it very seriously, and she demanded that we all learn to cook, and we all started cooking by age 5 or 6 to make a family meal. But I can tell you for sure, no one looked forward to my meals.
Interesting. I wanted to ask you this, whether your new understanding of chemistry, albeit 1950s, 60s chemistry, whether you do now have a new appreciation of the chemistry of cooking like your protagonist does. And so you do.
Yeah, it's really changed the way I think. I've always appreciated people who cook, but now I understand that they're not just people who cook, they're chemists. They're really high level chemists too. And I have Elizabeth Zott say, this will not be easy. And I wanted her to say that because I wanted to give the respect to these women who were creating these really interesting dishes with no credit for what they were actually doing.
You dedicated the book to your mother, Mary Swallow Garmus. She was evidently a big figure at home and in the neighbourhood. Do you have a sense that she felt frustrated or thwarted by her position in society?
Well, my mother was very quiet and very, very sweet. She would have never raised a ruckus about sexism or anything like that. However, she had been a nurse before she married my father. And I have to be honest and say that the four of us never took her nursing seriously until up to the day that when we were finally all out of the house, she and I were having a conversation on the phone. I was at college, and she said, I'm thinking about renewing my nursing license. And I said, oh my gosh, that's great. And she said, well, I'll be the oldest one in the class. So she went, and she renewed her license within a year. My mother had been a surgical nurse, so she was really highly skilled, but there were no nurses who would volunteer for the recently discovered disease AIDS. And my mother was the only one in her entire hospital who volunteered to nurse for the AIDS floor. And within a year, she won Nurse of the Year. And I remember one day, I went to pick her up at work. I had to walk around, and I finally found her in a room, and she was holding this young man's hand. This man had lost his sight. He was covered in sores. And there were these other men in the room, also in their beds, not looking at all well. And she was reading out loud to them. And afterwards, one of the men on that ward, he said, I know she's your mom, but she's our mom too. And it really meant so much to me to realize what she was doing and what she had done. But it also made me realize how much she'd given up, because this was her true love. And frankly, I think she very much wanted to be a doctor and always told us that girls couldn't be doctors because we weren't smart enough.
Your mother told you and your sisters that?
Yeah, because she was definitely a woman of her time in the culture, and that is the message she got. She was average, and she was not capable of more.
You're listening to The Food Chain on the BBC World Service. This week, author Bonnie Garmus is telling us the story of her life in 5 dishes. Before becoming a full-time author, Bonnie ran her own business as a copywriter, living in Switzerland and Seattle in the US with her husband David. The two first met in California when they were in their early 20s.
The second dish I like to talk about is scallops, garlicky scallops that I had at a restaurant called the Captain's Cabin in Palo Alto, California. David and I went there on our first date, and it was just an absolute disaster. We quickly learned that we had nothing in common with each other. He spent the entire time during this date talking about his old girlfriends and old cars, but when I ordered scallops, he didn't say anything like, oh, you shouldn't have that. But when they came, he made this really big deal about how I'd ordered scallops, and he was highly allergic to scallops. Why didn't you say something? The whole time I thought, does he carry an EpiPen? I don't know. But the whole conversation, I thought, I am never going out with this person again. This is disaster.
And he'd obviously ruined the dish for you, I presume.
Actually, and I started eating it. I thought, these are some of the best scallops I've ever had. Despite this tacky restaurant, these are really good. But it wasn't until after we had finally eaten where he said something like, I've really blown this. And then he became much different. And then we ended up standing in the parking lot for 2 hours talking.
This reminds me so much of Elizabeth Zott and how she meets and misunderstands and then comes to understand the great love of her life, Calvin Evans, the one person who takes her seriously as a chemist. So tell me, what was it that propelled you to write that first page about a woman having such battles in the workplace?
Well, what inspired me was a bad mood. I had been in a meeting and I had presented my ideas for a major campaign. These were huge campaigns. These were $1 million campaigns. I presented my ideas and no one said anything in this meeting. I was the only woman in the room. But